Hi, my name is Christine. Welcome to our podcast, Unmuzzled Conversations. Today we are on episode 4. So just a wee quick bit of information for you that it's clear to see that we are not professional podcasters, and that is not our aim. Our aim is to be authentic and raw and to more or less have our podcast unedited as much as possible, because that is what makes it real. So here on my right is my brother Stewart, as
Hello.
always. And we have been joined today by Tommy McNee, our lifelong friend.
Hello.
And a real expert on music, particularly in Glasgow. So Tommy is vital to our podcast today. Thanks for coming, Tommy. So I just also wanted to remind you that our aim with the podcast is to encourage as many older people as possible to get involved in the world of podcasting. There's so much out there for them. And we hope that some of the content that we're bringing today will encourage people to do that. And we just hope that you enjoy it. So get the kettle on, pour yourself a half, and sit back and relax and spend some time with us. We're going back in time to the 60s again, because we've got Tommy here, a bit of an expert. So we want to re-look at the 60s again with you today. So I just wanted to kind of talk about some of the facts that were actually happening in Glasgow in the 60s with the high-rise flats being built. And they called them the sky-high villages. Is that right, Stuart?
Yeah, village in the sky.
Villages of the sky. And I think the council had such high hopes for that. You know, that the life of tenements and tenement dwelling and the poverty that Glasgow was associated with because of that was gone, and the new schemes were built now, like your Drumchapel, Easterhouse, Chateau Olay.
That's Castlemilk.
And the new towns, you know, like East Kilbride, Glenrothes, you were talking about as well. Cumbernauld was a big one, Livingston. So people were now moving out of being city dwellers and moving out of the city, and the city was growing bigger. So I remember hearing a story about a guy and his family who lived in the city and had friends that had moved to Balornock. And he was out there for his holidays for a week and couldn't believe the exoticness of Balornock, because here was an actual house, not a flat in a building, but an actual house, and it had a garden at the front, a garden at the back, so there was grass for you to walk on. And I suppose if you live in the city, that is, you know, it's unusual and quite different for you. And he described, and a large forest to play in. But it's probably just like, you know, the outskirts, because to him, being a wee boy brought up in the city, that's what it looked like to him.
Well, I have experience of that from staying in a tenement in the east end of Glasgow, a single end.
Aye.
Right, where we only had a swan neck tap, cold water. It was
A swan neck tap?
Swan neck, it's copper swan neck.
Oh,
It
God.
was called. Just a copper, it's a bit of copper pipe that's bent.
Really?
A bit of bent copper, okay.
Trust
it's a
you.
swan neck to us.
Oh, absolutely, aye. So a
And,
single end, Tommy?
See, boasting again.
In a single end in Bridgeton.
Brigton, right, aye.
And not far from where we are just now.
Aye.
And then we were on the housing list. And we were given the very first houses that were built, which just before Easterhouse, was Cranhill.
Oh, right. I forgot about that.
And we went from a single end.
How many of you were there, Tommy?
Just me.
Just you and your
me.
mum and
At
dad?
that time, I have a sister who is 10 years younger than me, but I was only
at that time.
I was only about 4 or 5 years of age.
Aye.
And we were allocated, our name come up to get a house. And we went from a single end to with an outside toilet, you know, in the close.
Of course,
you know, with the newspapers in the string, and you know, for toilet paper, and you took them off, and you had to take the bits of newspaper off and wet them a wee bit, let's go there, and to put them in the cracks in the door, because there's all these cracks that are
a wee bit of DIY
in the
door, at the same time.
You sit people, has you finished yet? You finished yet? So you're like, there's somebody in, was the famous cry. Somebody else,
don't say that.
That's a real Billy Connolly thing as well, isn't it? He's
we went there, and we had it was a 3-room kitchen, right?
Wow.
2 bedrooms.
Wow.
Living room.
Was it a house, Tommy, or a high-rise flat?
A high-rise flat. It was a low-rise flat.
A low-rise flat.
It was like three flights.
Stories.
3 stories.
Right.
And we were the low flat, which had the front garden.
Oh,
right?
nice.
And which my father hated, but that's another story. But the main thing about it is when we went from a single end to a 3-room and kitchen with an inside toilet.
That must have been huge.
Which was pure luxury.
Pure luxury.
With no furniture. No, we'd only have furniture for one room.
You only had the furniture for one room, that's right.
Why wouldn't you? Why would you have
I
one
slept in what was called a bed chair.
Aye.
Right, it collapsed. Now,
did we call a futon
IKEA
now?
probably has them now, and called them the studning, the studning, or something like that. Anyway, I went for a bed chair, which was put into a room, right? We had nothing, no floor coverings. That we didn't have money for waxcloth, as they said then. Linoleum. When we got linoleum, it was absolutely fantastic for me, because as an only child, I could get these wee a tea towel and slide up and down the place, because there was no furniture in these rooms.
Yeah.
We only had bedroom for that, a bed chair in a room, and a couple of chairs for the living room.
So did you just kind of buy your furniture as time went on, as you could afford it?
Take your time to actually fill the house with furniture.
I never thought about that.
But I'm only saying
so true, isn't it, that you would only
it's
have...
only, in years when we discussed it, realised that at that time I just thought it was fantastic to have all these rooms to slide about in. But
remember the famous part in the Steamy where one of the women is going to be offered a house in Drumchapel. And she's a whole song written about it by Tony Roper. I can't remember what it was. But she was just, it ends up like she's like that, wide-eyed with the thought of going to the drum. Little did she know, but, and she was talking about we might be getting an electric washing machine and an inside toilet. And, it was like her dream thing. And so people must have felt like that. I mean, there's such an extreme way of living. So a huge benefit for people.
Different lifestyle altogether. Although there was no, at that time, the roads, they still had ash. They hadn't even tarmacked the roads when we went
I think
there.
that was the same for a lot of them. And the other thing they didn't think about, Tommy, was buses. So they didn't put on a lot of buses. And I remember reading that a lot of people maybe that had moved to the Drum and moved to Easterhouse actually had to still get a bus back to their old school. But even their old school, because there was no schools built. There was nothing there at all.
A bus to...
but very few buses, I think.
Bus to school. A school bus, a special school bus, took all the kids from Canhill down into Duke Street, where I went to school for a few years. But we actually hated it so much, and it was you had to walk to the Edinburgh Road to get a bus into town, which was about a half a mile walk. Yeah. Which for a kid seems a long way. Dangerous as well. You think about how we live now. That would never. God, I mean, parents are chauffeurs, aren't they now? They chauffeur their wains everywhere. But yeah, a huge difference. Just not thought through. No schools, no shops, no community centres, no doctors, none of the basic things. Little did we know how that was all going to turn out. But at the time, it was a huge improvement for people. Also in 1962, Glasgow said goodbye to the tramcars. I don't know if you remember being in a tramcar.
I remember.
I certainly remember being in a tramcar.
All the time.
With my mum, they were sometimes more common than buses, were they not? Tramcars in the day.
Well, that's it. And the tramcars were. I remember the different types of tramcars. Eventually they ended up what was called the Coronation tram car, which was very streamlined compared to, it was like the E-type of tram cars. The E-type tram cars, and you could, when you went upstairs and went through the fog of smoke that was there, even as a child, to get to the end, there's a wee door,
compartment.
the wee compartments at the end, and the great thing was that, as I say, when they got to the end of the line, the driver just went to the other end, because you could drive for both ends as well.
And they put all the seats back.
And they just turned the
seats
seats
back.
I remember that.
It's a clever idea.
Yeah,
it was clever.
Yeah.
They were quite comfortable things to sit in as well.
I remember reading that in 1962, when the tram cars were done, they had a huge procession of all of the tram cars. I can't remember where it came, right through Glasgow, and all the people lined the streets to see the last procession, or the last time they would see a tram car.
That's right.
It's quite a big deal.
Eventually, they all went into the Transport Museum.
Oh, of course, in Kelvin Hall.
Eventually, which then was at the Kelvin Hall.
So the other things going on in the 60s as well, as we all know, and I've mentioned before, was a lot of unemployment. So many people being employed in the big, heavy, old industries that were now beginning to come to an end. And I think the Clyde shipbuilding was probably the last, wasn't it? I was watching something where, what was the name of that guy who was standing up for everybody?
Jimmy Reid.
Jimmy Reid. Loads of photographs on Facebook of Jimmy Reid and how they were fighting to keep the shipyards. How long did that go on for before they just weren't going to give up? But I don't know. For a long time.
I think it was continuous, probably for the end of the Second World War. Well, obviously not him, but it was always being cut back and cut back. It didn't need them. I mean, it was a huge boom from the 30s anyway, and in the 40s an even bigger boom. And after that, the world was in recession for quite a while. And then they were building bigger boats in Japan and elsewhere, and cheaper boats. So the heavy industry was probably.
But I think that was probably the last year, wasn't it? I mean, the coal mines went, the steel works went. Was the shipbuilding the last? No.
I don't know. There was so many at the same time. But they're certainly, I mean, they're still there, but the numbers are tiny compared to what they were, and there's only a couple of yards left that I know of. But it was very, very sad.
It was very sad. And you think about, that is how most people were employed, and nothing replaced that. No. There was this mass. You just went into a factory, or you did various things, but there would always be a job for you, and they were gone. That employer thing of being able to employ hundreds of thousands of people was gone accumulatively. So that was very sad.
Yeah, and it wasn't just the heavy industries. I mean, that came from the printing industry, and that from the 60s and mid-60s onwards, they were cutting back hugely. Yeah. That was even before new technology. It was just getting done elsewhere cheaper. Yeah.
They just outpriced themselves.
People undercut them, people,
that's
and
the
communications, I mean, you could, I remember somebody telling me that in the mid-70s, moving into the 70s, a lot of the postcards were printed in Portugal. Scottish postcards, but because transporting them from Portugal to the UK was still cheaper than them getting printed in the UK.
That's
it just
crazy,
seems ridiculous. But that was
that's the start of
globalisation. Right, bang on, Tommy.
And it all just happened in the 60s. It all just started to come to a halt. The other thing that happened in the 60s, which was a kind of a national thing, was the Great Train Robbery. And you had a wee story to tell, you told me the other day.
Aye.
I just wanted to mention it was £2.6 million stolen on the train from Glasgow to London.
Well, that would be about £50 million now, easily.
Yeah.
But that was 60 years ago.
Value.
And I had seen a documentary on it, and they were talking that, it was old money. People are not really aware of that. It was old money that was taken to the mint in London to be destroyed, that would be replaced. So it was old worn notes. But I think at least £500,000 of that was Scottish notes. Well, the guys who done it were all Cockneys, so they had no use for it. They didn't have somewhere to get rid of this stuff. So they put 2 bags, maybe hundreds of thousands of pounds in Scottish notes, and they left them in a post box, in a phone box. And they were just discovered. Somebody just found them and reported them to the police. And I remember seeing photographs of at least 2 plastic bags full of Scottish notes.
Unbelievable. But that was and of course a movie was made. Several movies, I think, have been made
several
about
documentaries about it as well.
Yeah. Also, the Clyde Tunnel was built in the 1960s as well. And I remember my mum saying, "Is that under the Clyde?" Oh no, don't be doing that. And quite a lot of people felt that way about it at the time. Do you remember that?
I can certainly remember being, going with trepidation approaching the Clyde Tunnel.
Looking for leaks.
No, forgetting that the subway had run under it for
about 100 years.
And before that, we were still thinking it was still much higher. You felt there was a boat. Oh, suddenly you would scrape it, and the water would come to you.
That's exactly what
still
people
quite
thought.
a lot of boats in the Clyde. Getting up as far up to the Broomielaw for then. So you still thought that, there's a boat might go over, but you never thought that when you were in the subway.
Yeah, it's funny. The other thing that I found out was about an airport called Renfrew Airport, which I didn't know. You knew a wee bit about it. And it was kind of shut down. When did I say? It was decommissioned in 1963. So they clearly could see what was ahead. The Doon the Water holidays were definitely on their way out, and people were looking to now fly further afield for their holidays now.
There's a section of Bray Head complex, the shopping centre, that was part of Renfrew Airport.
Really?
And I don't know exactly.
Was it called Abbott Cinch, or was the new airport called Abbott Cinch?
No. It was Abbott Cinch Airport or Renfrew Airport. It's more Abbott Cinch Airport at first, I think. And then after that, it became Renfrew Airport.
Did you say you did some of your driving?
I actually,
school?
This was after I passed it became, it was used as a driving centre as well for people who had to go and pass their test. And that's where I passed my driving test from where it was situated now, because the various people had taken over it. They used it as a business centre.
That's right, I remember
like
that.
And I think there was a club there, a pilots club.
It was a flying club. I remember Renfrew Flying Club.
A small flying club there as well. But obviously, bigger planes would come in.
It must have been quite small then, because it wasn't really probably needed much.
Well, the buildings would be tiny.
Yeah.
Really?
Sheds. Probably a big area. But wee sheds basically. Wee hangars for these basically wee planes, private planes.
So I'm imagining that maybe the new airport was being built whilst that was being decommissioned.
What must have been?
Because I think it actually took, about 10 years for it to be completely decommissioned. So during that time, they must have been building Abbott Cinch, or what was to become Glasgow Airport.
When was it finally decommissioned?
1966.
1966. I'm just wondering if I ever flew from it. I remember I would be about 1966.
You'd be in your 20s.
20. And so I know that before then, as an 18-year-old, 18 or 19, flying to Spain.
Oh, really?
In a prop, right?
A prop?
A prop plane, a propeller plane. Right? No, I'll you remember
how
these
big
things.
Was it? How many people would be on
a big plane?
It was a fair-sized plane in it, but the most unfortunate name. The airline was called Spantax Airlines. Now you can imagine what people called it in Glasgow, especially the females. But I remember going in Spantax Airlines to.
It might have been for Prestwick, Tommy.
To Mallorca.
Yeah.
It might have been for Prestwick.
No, it wasn't. No, it was definitely Glasgow, and I can't remember whether it was Renfrew or whether it was because I passed my test and it was years later. It was 1972 before I actually passed my driving test. Then so it had been decommissioned, and by that time
it was used for other things.
Happened, but that was. What happened then is the famous Spantax Airlines to not Benidorm,
Spain generally.
Spain. It was was it called Pastilla, just outside Parma.
Got a memory, Tommy. What a memory you've got. The other thing, of course, at that time, and I just read this, was that the crime rates were high. There was these youth gangs, and they were actually, it says here, I don't know if it's true, that they were more violent than the 1920s razor gangs, which is where Glasgow had got some of that really bad reputation of being a really
No
tough
mean city.
No mean city, a really tough city. But you remember that, Stuart?
I remember it only too well, and they were total bastards.
And what age would you be then?
Every boy in Glasgow who went to the pictures or went to the dancing would come across these people, and you just hoped they never went for you. And I did get a doing just once, and I was purely innocent. I was with other people at Electric Gardens, and we just walked out, and we walked across the road, sat about. A guy hit me with a knuckle duster in the face, broke my nose, but I was okay. But they never. The good thing that I remembered even right after it was they didn't hang about to kind of play penalty kicks in my face. They just ran on. They just ran past us, and they battered some of the other guys that were with me. But we all got up, and I went to hospital. But I was
just
okay.
Random, Stuart?
Totally random. No, obviously there was fights between different gangs, but it was obviously people like us were the easy targets. We weren't the fighters. We were just boys.
And you'd have a wee drink in you then?
No. The
Not
dances
in those
they
days?
didn't have. The Electric Garden wasn't licensed.
God.
I don't think only the Picasso I think had a license.
No license in the Picasso.
Well, I'll tell you, when I was there, they did sell beer to me, and
They actually, I can remember, because I knew Norman Solomons, who owned the place quite well. By that time, I was playing in bands, and I played the Picasso quite regularly. And they actually had Carlsberg.
I was going to say,
Right, it was Carlsberg, but it was so it's such low alcohol. It would be called zero alcohol now.
Is that right?
But they did have Carlsberg
That's
in
what
bottles.
Oh, bottles.
Bottles of Carlsberg.
Right.
They
That's
didn't
it.
have it
Nothing else.
wasn't a draft. It was only you could
Bottles
only buy
only.
bottled of pop as well. The bottles of
Coke and things like that. Yeah.
but anyway, in general, the dancing they weren't licensed.
God.
The teenagers went to them. All the places they weren't licensed. Even the Barrowland wasn't licensed. So I had nothing to drink at all. I mean, that happened to me, but every Tommy would tell you tons of stories about these gangsters.
Well, I had quite a few episodes, from the point of view of before I was in a band. Even I was attacked in the toilets of a club, and they took the money that I had from me. And I was very fortunate because when the guy who threatened me with a knife and they pushed me up against the wall with a knife, and him and his pals, and went through my pockets, and they took out the money that I had in my pockets, but
they didn't actually hurt you, Tommy. They just took your money.
No, they just took my money. At that time, they took my money. But fortunately, because they'd pushed me up against the wall, I had 5 bob in my back pocket, right? And that got me the late night bus home. Or I'd had to walk
was on
home
your side,
from the centre of the city.
Yeah.
Right
And see,
down.
these gangs, was it anything to do with you were in the wrong part of the city, or was it the tongs, or was it just it was
gangs.
the tongs? Or
It was mostly in gangs, because if you were in that area,
that's what
It was
I meant.
territorial.
Like
went with her.
territorial,
It was very
Territorial.
no matter where it was, they would think me. But in particular, say the tongs would tend to be the East End of Glasgow.
We had them in Springburn as well. Stuart. They were everywhere, weren't they?
Every area
everywhere.
had them. It was like, obviously they must have been watching West Side Story, and decided, let's be one of them. That type of thing.
But the thing about that always appalled me about it was they turned in civilians.
Absolutely.
It wasn't fighting gangs in their own wee scene. It was basically just beating up local boys, maybe even girls sometimes.
Just because you can.
Because you can get away with it. People are frightened to tell the police and things like that. Yeah. Fortunately, they faded out. They just disappeared.
I think that I think there was a genuine police presence that helped that, I think there was a real clamp down on that type of behaviour where they actually did things like patrol the streets and things like that because they knew that this.
Because
this
when do you think that started to fade out then?
I'd say by the 70s. And the reason I'm throwing this in is one of my pals, a late pal, Rob McPherson, he became a taxi driver in the 70s. And I had moved out of the city by then. And I remember him saying to me, and I said, it's quite dangerous with all these gangs. He says, no, sure, there are not as many now. And he says, basically, I think it's as shallow as they're going out of fashion. And I would say visiting the city from time to time, there was definitely less threats of violence happening. So that's what he told me, and I'm sure he was right. He was working in taxis,
night,
in the town centres, and he would have noticed it.
Can I mention which was quite? I would say there used to be a club in Glasgow called the Maryland, and that was the Mary Hill. I think they were the Fleet.
The Fleet.
The Fleet. And they basically they were the gang that went into that one, and I was actually supporting Joe Cocker and the Grease Band.
Oh my God!
So we were supporting
in the Maryland.
In the Maryland,
my goodness!
Yeah. He had bands there that were emerging, but bands like The Move and there's lots and lots of them. Anyway, great promotions for up and coming top bands in Britain, guys that became extremely famous, and so we're supporting the and somebody, as Stewart says, they actually they weren't selective about who they attacked, and one of them, I was taking my drums off the stage to let Joe Cocker's band onto the stage, get their gear on. Joe Cocker's band at that time, for what I could see, were dead old men. No, right old men. And the drummer was this wee guy. At that time, he was bald. How dare he? And my locks. And anyway, the band come on. They were coming on, and this guy, just I don't know why, but it was a chain he had, right? And I just happened to see him try to hit me with his chain. I was on the stage shifting my drum kit, and I just dodged the chain, and the chain hit one of my tom-toms and burst the skin.
Oh,
right, but the clubs were jam-packed. They were. It was just sardines in the place, and it kind of just disappeared back into the crowd. I went upstairs into the dressing room, and the Grease Band were ready to go on, and they said I was pure white, shaking. There's this guy trying to hit me with a chain. There was a very famous guitarist who eventually played with Paul McCartney in Wings, and he had one of these hippie bags on at that time. He just had
fringes and that on them.
And he went into his bag, and as I said, they were old men, and he brought out a genuine Nazi bayonet.
Oh yeah,
right, with a swastika on it and a sheath. And he said, if I see a chain, they're getting this.
Oh God! And come prepared when you come to Glasgow.
I watched the whole set of Joe Cocker, and thinking, I hope that chain guy doesn't know what he's going to get. I hope I don't see a murder, and while it's happened. Played the set without incident. Now that was the end of it. So there's no punchline to the fact that there was blood in the dance floor.
Do you think that he brought that knife with him because he was coming to Glasgow, or do you think that would be a thing?
I just think he obviously probably at that time it was the music scene was rough then.
Do you know? I remember telling Christine one time when my pal Henry Hope and I, we went down to London in 1968, went down for 2 weeks, and we went to the Marquee Club, and we just walked in, and I just walked in, and the bouncers coming out, I just went like that. And he says, "What are you doing?" I says, "I'm putting my hands up so you can search me." He says, "We don't search people in here." And you go, and I was flabbergasted, because if you were a punter,
right.
every single place you went to in Glasgow, you were searched. And they used to say it was the girls that used to bring the knives in.
And the girls always had a carry-out in their bag.
That's right.
I'm not saying that that's not true. I just don't remember people drinking a lot in these places. I just don't remember it. That doesn't mean it didn't happen. But to me, they were just mental enough without drink. They might have been drinking before.
I know I happened to use the female agent female to get the quarter bottle in, because and especially into the old Locarno.
Oh,
because,
God, yeah.
Because and the thing about it was that she worked, the girl that we knew worked serving the Coke, the soft drinks, right? So it was like having our own personal bartender. So we'd have a wee quarter bottle with Coke in it, that she actually dispensed.
I think young people would be quite, or younger than us, maybe not young people like Cam, but younger than us, would find it quite unbelievable to think you would go to the dancing and there would be no drink at it.
But I mean, I think an even bigger contrast than that is then and now, and I'm talking about now, but 10 years or so, no any longer than that, Tommy took me to see a younger guy that he knows playing in a band in Glasgow, and it was all young people, and there was no violence at all.
Yeah.
There wasn't a hint of violence. Now, when we went, you go to the Maryland Electric Gardens, any of these places, you were always watching out. Always, and there was almost always a fight. But then, the late 60s, the bouncers were pretty well organised, and they had it under control quite quickly. But it still happened, and there was always the threat of that. At that time, I was out with Tommy, with younger people, teenagers even, early 20s. There was nothing at all. I thought that is real progress.
Absolutely.
And albeit there's now drink, when you think there isn't drink now, or drink.
And drugs, there's more drugs now.
And there was no violence, so things had improved hugely.
Well, they needed to, didn't they? That no mean city reputation went on for a long time.
It's the improvement has been great improvement, and it's also marvellous to walk around the city, although it seems to have fallen back a bit recently. But then.
But from the safety perspective, and I think as well, Stewart often talks about the tourism thing, and how it was when we were young, and even as adults, you really didn't see the tourists that you would see if you were in.
Basically, there were no tourists in Glasgow. There would be people visiting. You would call them visitors because they'd relatives or whatever, or were coming back to the old country. But very, very few people would ever deliberately visit Glasgow if they had no connection to it, because it's such a deservedly bad reputation. For
a long time. A long time.
Absolutely.
So the next thing I wanted to talk about was the Odeon cinema, because I didn't realise the relevance until I spoke to you earlier, Tommy, about the bands that were playing there. I just had these examples because there's such a variance between them. Johnny Cash, Duke Ellington, the Beatles and the Rolling Stones. But you obviously went to quite a few of the concerts and seen other bands. So, I mean, these were huge. But these would be up and coming, though, would they not? The Beatles were up and coming in the 60s,
no.
Were they quite...
They were top of the tree. But
they were, by that time, I mean, the Beatles and Beatles in particular, but because the Rolling Stones, as I say, I went to their first concert in the Odeon Cinema. Odeon Cinema. And I remember as I say, I'd started working as a commie chef in the centre of Glasgow in a restaurant. So therefore, I was working every time the Beatles came. I was on a late shift and I never saw them. Yeah. But Renfield Street was, you couldn't move the whole day. In Renfield Street when the Beatles were at the Odeon Cinema. It was just, I had no idea who it was, but I'm sure they just did this deliberately, where maybe a road manager, a roadie or something like that would open a wee window and put a hand out, and all the kids would scream. And then it would, and then they'd shut the door.
Yeah, just to
somebody
keep it all going.
Right, no, you can just
Probably
imagine
say
them
there's
nowadays.
the cleaner.
They're
Put your hand out.
they're sitting in. They would say, right, Trevor, it's your turn now.
So what other bands did you see then, Tommy? You were talking about Jimmi Hendrix.
Absolutely. See, I saw everybody from the Small Faces, all the band, and bands like there were these pop packages where there would be maybe six acts on a band, or bands or solo acts. With a backing band, and I've since read various documentaries, books, and lifestyles, and they've been playing with bands like, for example, Richie Blackmore played with Neil Christian and the Crusaders. He was a crusader,
right?
Right, for example, things like that.
Yeah.
There were. Also, people like Chris Farlow, who was
Chris.
He was out in his own. But he had back musicians who played in big bands that went on to have great careers. As that, there was a band called Sounds Incorporated who backed the brass section, and they backed people like for example, Jimmi Hendrix was a support act to Engelbert Humperdinck.
That is
who was
that should be against the law.
Right, you couldn't imagine. They were so. But
how extreme!
The top the top of the bill was actually the Walker Brothers.
Oh, they were very popular.
Engelbert, but Hendrix was right down the bill.
Yeah. He would be mortified now,
but these acts just had no more than 3-4 songs.
Yeah.
Right? It was like now, whereas that acts now have got a set that's going on forever, 2 and 3 hours, obviously. The fact that big acts that have been there for years have got a catalogue of songs to play. Whereas at that time they only maybe had two songs.
2 hit records or something.
Stevie Winwood was the singer with the Spencer Davis group, who had Keep On Running.
Oh, yeah.
He was
I'm
only about 15 years of age, and he was what a great voice and things like that. I saw the Hollies last week at the concert hall.
And how were they?
Who were fantastic.
Oh, good.
There's only 2 of the original members, but interesting thing about the Hollies is that we're going into the concert hall, and I was looking, and they've got a huge Arctic truck and a huge double-decker tour bus with beds. Double-decker tour bus with beds in it and things like that.
Nice.
Right. Now, when I saw the Hollies in the 60s in the Odeon, they would all go in a small transit van and sleep in it as well. Right. They would all probably overnight.
Yeah.
So
things change. Now they've got their own beds.
But as I said, we saw these. It was great to see all these fantastic acts that I can remember now, right through to that. For Roy Orbison, right through to all the pop acts that were on just now.
I was looking as well at some of the Glasgow bands or Scottish bands that were quite big in the 60s as well. And one of the ones that I absolutely remember is the sensational Alex Harvey band.
I've got to say, I didn't like him. Alex Harvey was revered. And to me, he was he was a jazz singer or a blues singer. And I liked pop music. Yeah. I liked, what was it? Tear Gas was his backing band. Yeah. I liked Tear Gas better than I liked the Alex Harvey band.
As I say, it's true. I thought they were great, but then again, because he created an image.
He did.
Right.
Well, to call it that, the sensational Alex Harvey band.
Just come up with that.
Yeah.
And say,
Aye.
She did a couple of hit records as well.
Yeah.
As I say, but you're absolutely right in as much as that he put a
great
did
PR
put
man.
a great band together.
Yeah.
He came to come to Glasgow and find tear gas.
Yeah.
And take it from there.
The other bands that were going about were, Lulu, not really a band, but she was part of that era. Donovan was going about in the 60s. No,
but he wasn't. He was completely divorced from Glasgow. He pretended he was English, and he only became Scottish again when I think his audience dried up and he could make a few quid playing in Scotland at New Year and things like that.
Was he Scottish then?
Donovan Leitch's name was.
Donovan Leitch. It came from Anderson.
Oh, so he was Glaswegian.
It originally came from Glasgow, but went to.
He was in London.
It went down to in England. I remember him. I've got some memory of him as a commis, when I was a commis chef, and I went away down and I did a summer season in Newquay in Cornwall, and Donovan was busking on the beach.
My God.
No, he was bumming around.
Yeah.
Then, and that was about 1962, something like that. I was only 17, and I remember it was Donovan and people. He'd that chap that used to run, I think it was
Gypsy Dave.
Gypsy Dave.
Aye.
They went round. They used to bum around the beaches in Cornwall, things like that. So, as you say, Stewart, he left Glasgow very early.
He didn't have. He had no trace of a Scottish accent at all.
No.
The other bands that came up were the Marmalade, Glasgow band, were they not? Glasgow band,
were originally
Dean Ford
and the Gaylords, and their drummer inspired me.
Oh, really?
Particularly a chap called Raymond Duffy. Right. Now Raymond was a commie chef.
Oh, really?
Right. We used to meet, and he stayed in Mary Hill next to across from the Seymour Cinema. Do you remember it?
No.
In Mary Hill Road, anyway. He was stayed in the top flat, and I think what happened was that he actually got burned by in the kitchen,
working,
and at that time, and he got some money through insurance or something like that, and he bought this drum kit, and he had a drum kit up in his house in the top flat in Mary Hill, and I remember in the afternoons getting up. His friend was a commie chef that played. He was in another restaurant, but we always finished in the afternoon. You'd a split shift. You finished the service, and then you went back.
That's right.
Again at 5:30, and so it was nothing. It was pointless going home. Especially he stayed the nearest to the city, so I went up to Raymond's and he let me use it. Play his drums. I had some. I'd started in the boys' brigade, so I knew a wee bit about drumming. But by that time, he had a full drum kit in his house, in his room.
God.
Raymond went on to play it to.
So he went on to be in the Marmalade.
He went on to be in Dean Ford and the Gaylords, and then the Marmalade. But he left them very quickly. And he went to work with Matthew Still Comfort.
He did. Ian Matthews.
And I think he did some work with Gallagher and Lyle and things like that. Really nice guy. And
of course, the other guy
who
appeared at that time was Billy Connolly.
No, in the 60s.
The Humble Bums?
They might have appeared, but they were folkies. They were not. And where they told me, I mean, I don't remember them ever.
They were folk clubs.
Aye, but what I'm saying, they weren't involved in what we were.
No.
And they were not popular. They were popular with their own audiences, maybe, but they were not widely popular.
And of course, the kind of phenomenon of that time was the Bay City Rollers, and I know they're not from Glasgow, but they were a phenomenon for reasons.
That was maybe the 70s, Well, they were going in the 60s, but they didn't make the big time till they were in the 70s.
Going in the 60s. Say that.
But they must be the most well-known band that's come out of. I
would
know they
say
were Edinburgh, weren't they?
They were worldwide.
They were
You know.
worldwide,
certainly. The
for
fact
reasons
that
that escape me. And also Jerry Rafferty. He was he part of the
he was
Humble
part
Bums?
of the Humble Bums.
Yeah, because he
That-
went on
that-
to be very famous as
lovely.
well, didn't he?
Great songwriter.
Great songwriter, Jerry
Absolutely
Rafferty.
Great songwriter.
Of course, I was thinking back to the fact that what my mum and dad would have been watching. These are the things that you two in particular would be interested in. But my mum was still a big fan of Al Doonican. And that kind of music, and Moira Anderson, and that kind of stuff, and also Herb Albert and the Tijuana Brass.
Yeah.
Stuart was reminding me Jim Reeves. So that was all the kind of music that older
But she
people
also
were.
liked the other two. What was the guy for Ayrshire?
Sydney
Devine.
Sydney.
And the female
She
equivalent,
did.
Herfy
She
Bishop
did.
Briggs, who had a
Lena
number,
Martell.
Lena Martell,
Yeah.
number one hit record.
That's right.
But I remember my mum saying, why do you not like them? I don't know.
It's very obvious. You have to say, though, these people had huge careers.
Absolutely.
Well,
I mean, right into their elderly years.
That's right. Well,
Sydney Devine.
Don't forget that in the 60s, if you look, because as every generation, the young people have focused in a particular type of music of their generation.
Yeah.
Right? The rest is rubbish to them.
So it is.
Right? It's just rubbish. Right? Whereas, so therefore, with us, we're listening to the Hollies, the Small Faces, the Rolling Stones, for me, particularly the Beatles, okay, that we gone like that. But if you go into the charts, Lena Martell was there.
Yes.
Ken Dodd.
That's right. Tom Jones.
Here's for souvenirs. And your mother's, and they would,
The Bachelors.
That's it.
The Bachelors.
The Bachelors,
that's
aye.
right.
Good, clean, loving Irish boys, you know.
All these
But
things.
were they?
Who knows? Probably not. Probably not.
But they would, your parents loved these. Really like that's their type.
That was
type
their
of music.
type of
Gene
music.
It was
Pitney.
an exact
Gene
same
Pitney,
thing.
yeah.
Oh, Gene Pitney was considered. He considered himself,
The young group.
Young.
But for us, it wasn't.
No, but we're never.
We saw through you, Gene.
Cliff Richard and people like that. Aye.
Right. But they were never considered rebels.
No.
I mean, Gene Pitney, for example, had all this in these immaculate suits, and his hair was always lovely and cut and things like that. People, that was the things. The minute that you went away for the norm of having a suit, and
That was
starting
very
your
rebellious,
hair,
wasn't
the
it?
hair. As it got longer and longer and longer, and then you were a generation. Then you were the generation, and you had an image.
And you were very
right
obvious,
image
weren't
of
you?
that.
You couldn't blend into a young version of your parents. Whereby in the 50s, I think,
You look-
it was
Aye,
more
aye, so
like
They
that.
looked like their dad.
They
Yeah,
did.
yeah.
Just the younger
A
A
versions.
younger version of your dad.
Oh,
Because you
absolutely.
wore the same clothes. There
Absolutely.
wasn't like different clothes shops and that. It was all...
I just want to throw in, because we're getting past it, the two of my favourite Glasgow bands were the Dream Police and the Pathfinders. And I just think
right.
we have to throw them in because
Absolutely.
I thought they were brilliant.
Absolutely.
I thought I'm not going to say they were better than everybody else, but they were my favourites.
We could certainly go in about them. You know, as I say, there's quite a few. I say, I mean, I ended up with what was considered I'm trying to find this epitome of the it wasn't even rock. No, but Chris McClure's section.
Oh, yeah.
No,
Extremely
Chris
popular.
McClure's section was
Extremely popular.
So popular.
Very much
Right.
so, yeah. For a
And
long time as well.
Chris was a fabulous singer. Chris still is a fabulous singer. But as I say, they didn't have a raw image. No, they were Chris McClure's section until when I was with them, the glam rock thing was just starting. And so therefore we were getting into the glam rock stuff with the shiny
They
material.
were more what I would have called a kind of wedding band.
You know.
Oh, they were a bit more than that.
Were they?
Christine. Oh,
Right,
aye,
sorry.
aye,
That's,
more
well,
than
that's
that.
what I'm saying. That probably is the sort of image, because they had, you know, this
Suits
really
and
nice.
things.
They weren't like a
suits.
young person's
That's
band.
right. No,
They weren't.
no,
No, but they were
never-
still. They were
never-
still shit hot. I mean,
Eventually,
and very, very popular.
Eventually, that they, you know, if it developed into, you know, the image that was required for the, you know, for that
If you want
era.
to sustain yourself,
Aye.
you've
Aye.
got to be part
So-
of what's growing, isn't it? The
No,
growing
just-
look and the what
so
the
that,
young
you know,
people
that's
want.
when the, you know, the
Yeah.
big, huge satin flares and
Oh,
all
aye.
that were coming out.
Yeah.
They're all coming in then. But he started in the 60s in Denniston Pally
Yeah,
as a resident singer in there.
and had a good career.
Oh, I see.
Long,
No,
long
a
career.
Long
Yeah.
career.
So I just want to change the subject a wee bit from music and talk a wee bit about the way we were brought up in the 60s. And I used to think that, probably till I spoke to you, Stuart, that our parents were quite stoic. But I suppose I'm only saying that in comparison to how children are brought up today. You know, I mean, the way they were brought up was a little bit more disciplined. And, you know, I remember saying to my mum, oh, I've got really bad period pains. And she'd say, oh, is it affecting your legs? No, get your fucking uniform on. Off you go to your school. So that's an example. She wasn't like that all the time because, as you know, she was a very kind and generous person. But there was a kind of sense of no nonsense. And I was saying to Stuart, and I hear this a lot when you're in the supermarkets, you hear parents saying to their small children, I'm talking preschool children, what would you like for your dinner tonight? And I just remember, my answer to myself always is, that was never our decision to make. That was decided. And when it was decided years before, I think we were born, that Monday would be stew, Tuesday would be mince. I'm only using this as an example, and Stuart corrected me. And then there would be Wednesday.
It's actually Monday was mince.
Right.
Tuesday was stew.
it was-
Wednesday was a fry up. Honestly,
Yeah.
right through the whole week.
Yeah. And it never, ever altered. I can never remember at any point.
And why
ever.
should it change? It was brilliant.
Yeah.
I love that kind of routine.
I think as well that it was very much, particularly in the winter, a 3-course dinner. In the winter, it would be soup.
Aye.
And then there would be obviously an exotic tinned thing,
yes.
like peaches and Nestle's cream, which is my favourite, or ambrosia custard with mixed fruit salad,
Oh,
or
aye.
pears. I love the pears and the peaches. So I
Don't
kind
forget the evaporated milk.
evaporated milk. Exactly.
I didn't know what that is when you think, what was it? It was white stuff.
Don't tell us.
White stuff with sugar in it.
Do not tell us whatever was in that.
I think it was just boiled milk.
I was lots of sugar.
With some. No, that's you're talking. That's condensed
Is it on
milk,
top? Sorry.
which is very different
Is
from
it?
evaporated milk.
Mama, but sometimes if you were exotic, you would get evaporated milk in your coffee.
Oh.
My mother would say, evaporated milk. As if to say, we don't have fucking ordinary milk. Evaporated.
It's a champagne of milk.
Yes. And the other thing I was thinking about as we were growing up was how we were talking earlier about women knitting, and knitting was a big thing for nearly all women, I would think. All women that I knew knitted, and of course Aran sweaters were and cardigans were very much a full family rig out. I mean, even a baby would have an Aran jumper or an Aran hat or something like that, you know. And everybody, and I think that went into the 70s as well. But back in those days when they kind of first came out, it was the proper Aran wool with the waterproof. What was it? Was in
It's
it?
just lanolin. It's basically kind of oil.
Because
It's
they were
wax.
so
Aye, kind of
heavy.
oily stuff.
Do you remember lifting an Aran jumper? It weighed a ton. When it was on you, you were like I could fucking even move your hands up and then like that. It was, at the beginning anyway, when all these, when that first kind of came out. But I was saying to Stuart that our mum wasn't a knitter of that. I mean, that was pretty hardcore. You had to be a really, really, really good knitter to follow these patterns. And we had ours ordered. So a woman 2 streets away, Betty or something, she would say, "Go up to Betty's and you have to take your measurements." So we would all get measured and she would go back up to Betty's. But I remember thinking at the time they were about £20. They were extremely expensive. And I remember thinking, God, that's a huge amount. But in the end, as long as you didn't put them in the washing machine, because my mum was famous for putting them in the washing machine, and they fucking come out like that.
You don't
And
fit
I'd
your
say,
Sunday
is that
doll.
stuff for my dog? And I'd be trying to put it on the dog, things like that. And I'm trying to put a cardigan on them because that's the only thing. So as long as you didn't destroy them by putting them in the wrong wash, they were something that you could actually hand down. And never did the colour change. It was always the Aran white. You never saw, like nowadays you can buy Arans, they're incredibly expensive now if they're handmade. You can actually make them in a knitting machine now, but I don't think they're the same quality. But you can get them in red, you can get them in green.
Why not? If you think about it, you know, dye them, aye.
But that, I don't remember people wearing a lot of jackets then. I think people wore a lot of coats then. And that was, you just were put out in your hand jumper. No matter if it rains.
But you know
and
what?
of course, you would always have the hidden rain mate. Right? Don't forget your rain mate. Right, okay. So,
Do you know what I remember,
in your
Christine?
pocket.
I hated the cardigans. I had one that was a crew neck, and it was actually, you know, in the 60s, everyone was meant to be tight on you, you know, even though you looked like a total dick, but you wanted everyone to be tight. Everyone wanted to look like Steve Marriott. And I remember, I had one that was quite smart. It was a crew neck. It was okay. But I remember seeing people with these big fucking huge ones with the big buttons. Remember the
Oh, yeah.
and they would get wet.
Wooden buttons.
Leather.
Half
Leather.
football.
Leather.
It looked like a half a football.
Fucking that's a doorknob. But I remember, the thing was, I remember there was this guy used to come to work on a Saturday morning. We used to sometimes do overtime on a Saturday morning, and he used to always wear his Aran cardigan. And one day he gets soaked between the car park and the factory, and his cardigan was down at his knees, and it looked like it would have fitted, I don't know, some monster.
Like a coat. An Aran
But it
coat.
went like that as well. And it also, I don't know why, it wasn't even, you know. I thought, this backs me up why I never ever wanted one of these. But
My mother was a
you're
rubbish
sweet.
knitter. She was a rubbish knitter. I mean, she tried to knit a Fair Isle pullover once,
hard.
which is really difficult because
Oh,
you've all
yeah.
these different colours,
Yeah.
and was never successful.
Yeah.
You know, she had about 20 attempts. You know, there was a bit, and you know, they held it up against you, right. And she'd say, "Come here," right, and she'd say, "Right," and she would knit a bit more. And, "Come here," right. Hold it up.
you've grown. You've grown in the last 10 minutes.
You know, it's sitting there going like that. You know, and pull it up, you stretch it up a bit. See, and then she'd say, "Right, I'll need to get a V-neck," and you, oh no, and she'd try and sew a V-neck, you know, that sew a V-neck, and then and gave up, and suddenly, and the next thing was to try to do socks, and socks, but she could never turn the heel. So I used to go to school with 8 tubes, with 2 woolen tubes, and which were great inside your wellies. You could put them over the top.
Didn't hit your ankles again.
No, that's it. So there'd be, I mean, they were obviously. She was way ahead of her time because the next time I saw that type of socks were these leggings that were on
Leg warmers.
Leg warmers.
Dancers
Aye.
and Pan's People and things like that.
In the 80s.
You know, and I thought, geez, their mothers can't turn a heel either.
I was remembering as well about all the women, including my mum and maybe your mum too, went to the Mecca for all knitters, which was Gall's, the knitting shop
for the wool,
for the wool, but also for the needles and everything that was required. I think there was a lot at the time. Ours was in Springburn Road, so my mum would always go there. But I actually found when I was looking at this was that Gall's is actually online now. So although you can't go to a physical Gall's shop, the name Gall's is still available if you want to go and order wool and things like that. So imagine after all these years, this Galls has still got a presence online.
I thought that had gone
Me too.
forever.
Me too.
Did you ever I remember sitting watching, no, you're 13, the world's against you, you hate everybody, you hate your parents. I remember sitting watching the telly, watching something that I thought was shit my parents were watching. And my mother would say, shit! And I had to stand like that. And she'd put the wool and make you
That's right.
It took all of about 10 minutes, but you hated her for doing this to you.
What was it? I was trying to figure out why they did that.
No, because
to make
that's
balls.
how it came.
To make a ball.
You got that.
They sold
Yarn?
them in
Was it
hanks.
called a yarn?
That's
Oh,
well
hanks.
done, Tommy.
They
Aye.
sold them in hanks. I don't know.
right,
Obviously, it was easier for them to, when it came off the machine, rather than roll them up into a tight ball, was to have a big machine.
would sell it
they
like
must
that.
have done that. That way, and that's their machine did it simply, and this big hank of wool, and that was the easy thing to transport. It must have been ages to get it into a wee tight ball. So as Stuart's saying, you had to stand there.
Go like
There's
that.
probably about 100 yards or something, and you're like,
You're sitting there going,
oh God, like Kevin the teenager going, oh God, I hate them. I hate them even more now.
I hope none of my pals come in.
And
They're probably got the same there.
and you couldn't do anything. I mean, once
No.
you'd started, that was it.
Oh,
I mean,
that's-
the house burnt down, it wouldn't matter.
Just stay where you are.
All you to
And the
get
other
The
thing
fireman will be here soon.
Doesn't matter. You stay where you are. And I also remember that if you were in trouble, she'd say, right, Christy McCormack, come
aye.
down these stairs. You always get your two names. You always get your,
It's after
your
somebody
full
else
name.
up there.
You go, fuck, you knew that you were in for it if you get your two names. But the other thing about my mum was that she was a great baker, as you'll remember, Tom, and you were a regular visitor to our house
Most
when you were
definitely.
young. And her clooty dumpling and her fruit loaf were absolutely legendary within her pals, and she'd make them for the church and things like that. And I just wanted to think about the bakeries that were going about in that time. Apart from people who were doing home baking, there was the City Bakeries and Ald's Bakeries and Murphy's the baker. I don't know if you remember Murphy's. And the reason I remember it is because I used to love soda bread, and it was the only place you could get the proper Irish soda bread, and there was very, very few Murphy's. But I was also reading that Billsland the Bakers was one of the most successful bakeries in Glasgow for a long, long time, and they employed hundreds and hundreds of people. It was a big
Meadow
concern.
Park Street down
that-
in Anderson.
Was it Manderson?
In fact, I don't know whether you can still. It wasn't. You could still coming across the old coming
You used
across
to
the
see the
Kingston
big
Bridge.
Billsland
You could still see the Billsland sign
that it
when the bakery had gone, for a decade at least, and it was gone. But you could still see the Billsland's bread sign. Yeah.
So it says here that it was open from 1900s to 1985 when it finally wound up. And it also said they were very good employers, they were very fair, and they paid very good rates, and they also gave free bread to all of their employees. So at that time, that must have been quite unusual. It was almost like being kind, isn't it? There wasn't even very many examples of that amount of people. So I just brought in today a couple of examples of stuff you can still buy. You can still buy today, but I kind of wonder how, if young people would ever buy these things, although they're still readily available, of the things that absolutely take me back to when I was young. And here in this wee plate here is what would be called a selection of cakes. And your mother, because we went for the messages, just for small things, go and get a selection of cakes and pick good ones, and you think, oh my God, the pressure. What is that going to mean? Because what's good to me, what did you get that cake for? Where did you eat that? That kind of thing. So you'd be so nervous,
Absolutely.
given that responsibility of choosing 6 cakes. It was very worrying. And the Stewart was saying they came in the box. Remember in the City
it was
Bakery,
usually
and the
tied,
string,
a bit of string,
like,
aye.
and they had a big yarn thing in the string and cut it off with their teeth sometimes.
But you were saying you were going for the messages.
Yeah.
Now, people, it's only Scottish people that go for the messages.
Yeah.
There's English, Irish, Welsh. No, if you said you're going
With
for
Tommy, the message bag.
with a message bag, and where are you going? I'm going for the messages. Now, if you went to any other country in Britain and said you were going for the messages, they would expect you to come back with a bag full of letters.
Exactly.
Been to the post office.
Notes.
That's or
Notes
somewhere
and
that they're going, right, people, how many guys going away? That's hundreds of messages because you got a big bag. But as I say, that was going.
I think it was a Glaswegian
shopping
thing, Tommy.
Quite possible.
Because I mean, I lived in Falkirk for a long time,
Right.
And you know, and it wasn't nobody. I don't remember anybody ever going for the messages in Falkirk.
Right.
In that area, I know I lived in that area,
What
different
did they
places.
call it? Did they call
I
it
go to
shopping?
I think you just
Aye.
went shopping.
Aye.
Went to the shops.
No,
Aye.
aye. I don't know, as I say, very much, as I say, it could
I
quite
still
easily
say it
be a
today.
Glaswegian thing, but certainly still use that. You know,
I do remember the message bags. I don't know where they were bought from, but they were very similar, and sometimes had tartan on the front of them at the side, and a big zip.
Big zip.
A big
yeah.
zip like this, and they wore them like that, put them like that, and when that was done, immediately they would get another one. So, I mean, in those days as well, you would get a poke,
Well,
a
again,
brown
another
poke.
another
Do you remember that?
Scottish word,
Word.
a poke.
Yeah.
It's not. I've worked with English people, and if you say, I've got a poke of chips, for example, something like that.
Yeah.
I've got no idea, a poke of anything.
But back in those days, they were very much the thing when you went into shops. I'm trying to think of what they would put in a poke. It would be something like, for example, if you said, I just want 2 apples, and you get different sizes of pokes as well. You get small, medium, and large, and they'd put them in a poke, and then they would do that. Do you remember they did that, and there was these little knot things at the end, and you put it straight into the message bag. So pokes were actually recycling when you think about it, And there was no plastic bags in those days. No. Obviously, it was all a proper bag that you used for shopping. There was no such thing.
What was a great thing about pokes as well? This is for entertainment value. Is that see having a coal fire, right, and the fireplace, right? You get a poke and you open it out. Just kind of open it out and pinch out the corners at the top, right, and put it, and then lie it in front of the fire, right, and then light the 2 ends, right,
of the poke.
Now, you did this when your mother and father were out.
And the fire brigade was handy.
Unfortunately, I never set fire to the prefab. But the thing about it was, as I say, it's a scientific experiment, because when it burnt down, and it's what these Chinese lantern type things, right? It lifted up.
God, I didn't know
and then
that.
went up the chimney because of suction, right? So it just, it was brilliant. You could just sit and watch it and then go, and not for a minute did I think that would not go up there. Instead, I go straight up into the ceiling and torch the place.
But no, I just thought, what else you could do? You could blow them up and make them bang.
Oh, that was brilliant. That was
Behind somebody.
go up somebody. Oh, yes, yeah, beauty.
So, I think we're going to end it there. We're just about over an hour, so I think that's long enough. So I just want to say to everybody, thanks so much for being here today, Tommy. Great to be with you again, Stewart. And let's just say that's going to be the end of this episode. Thank you to everybody for joining us today. It's been great to have your company. And don't forget that you can find us now on Facebook, and the podcasts you can find on YouTube and Spotify. Please go and have a look.
TikTok.
And TikTok.
We're on
My
TikTok.
God, I always forget that. TikTok.
Do you know what it is? But young people
But we're
like
on it. We're on it.
I'm sure somebody out there knows what it is.
So that's all the places that you can find us, and we look forward to seeing you next time.